Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled She Warned Me Not to Touch Her, but when I did, the stars themselves screamed. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The first scream came from a star no one had ever seen with their eyes. It was a small thing, an ember of a sun tucked inside a ruin of rock and dust at the ragged edge of the Perseus arm. On survey charts, it was catalogued as JX11 Theta. To the crew of the human frigate Ardent, it was a routine. They had drifted for 6 months through a withered frontier where maps were lies and silence weighed as much as steel. Captain Elias Mercer listened to the sensors like a priest listens to bells. He was a broad-shouldered man weathered by vacuum and sleep, a man who carried the last warm light of the worlds he loved in the few photographs tucked in his locker. A city skyline on old Earth smeared with rain, a little girl's handprint in blue paint, a river with reeds leaning toward a brown dog. He let the images stay closed tonight. He listened, and he felt the ship's bones whisper back. The scream arrived as a tremor through the hull, a note lower than grief, higher than the taste of copper. It was not sound. It was pressure, a thumb on the heart. Every panel bloomed with noise. The comms officer cursed. A coffee mug tumbled in slow spin, caught by a scarred hand. "What is it?" Elias asked, though Daria, their xenobiologist, was already unstrapping. "Not a flare," she said, her eyes quick, tender, always hungry for what the universe withheld, tried to focus on data that was not there. "It's a pulse. But it's not radiative. It's like a feeling our instruments decided to interpret, sir. It's coming from the dead star." The dead star was not dead anymore. Outside the viewport, the distant ember trembled. A bruise of color ran along its limb, purple, then white, then a rippling band that flickered like heat above snow. The onboard gravitational map sketched a wave curling through vacuum without a medium to carry it. "Source," Elias said. Daria tilted her head. "Something embedded in the corona. Not natural." He gave the order no captain wants. "Approach the unknown." They cut a slow arc in, engines murmuring, shields drinking the star's sullen wind. The object surfaced from glare the way a memory surfaces, indistinct, then undeniable. It was not a ship unless ships could be grown. Its hull looked like bone layered with glass, smooth where it should have been riveted, warm where it should have been cold. The Ardent's lidar slipped over it as if the thing bent light away in long, gentle turns. "Docking port," said Chief Petrov, the engineer whose voice always made Elias think of smoke and engine oil no ship had used in 100 years. "None," Daria said softly. "No seams, no doors." "Then how do we knock?" It opened for them. A petal bloomed in the bone glass. Atmosphere hissed, but not into vacuum. Their scanners reported pressure. Oxygen, a delicately salted composition that traced the same arc on every graph as human comfort. The ship invited. Elias felt a cold hand close around his sternum. He looked at Daria. She did not smile because she had learned in war not to smile at miracles. Miracles behaved like traps. "Boarding team," Elias said. "Minimal, masks, tethers. We go slow." They went with the careful grace of people who had been trained to step into tombs and call them laboratories. The chamber inside the hull was dim and vast. Light came from the walls, not from fixtures, a mother-of-pearl glow that made human skin look tender and almost translucent. The air smelled faintly of rain before it fell. Daria found the heartbeat first. "Feel that?" she whispered. They did. It throbbed rather than sounded, a pressure that came every few seconds like a tide. The walls did not move, yet the sensation of inhalation was unmistakable. It felt like standing on a chest and feeling the rise beneath your boots, inappropriate, intimate. "Readings." "Insufficient," said the sensor tech. "The instruments don't know what it is, so they call it normal." It isn't. They found the central chamber by following the feeling of breath to the place where it was largest. It resembled a cathedral in the way all places of reverence resemble one another. High, curved, built to focus attention. Between four sweeping pillars grown from the same bone glass rose a column of clear material, crowded inside with slow white motes like snow trapped in syrup. And at the base of the column, standing as though she had been there a very long time and could afford to wait longer, the woman. She looked human. That was the first cruelty. Her figure was slender, strong. Her hair fell in pale coils that defied gravity like threads in water. Her eyes were closed, lashes dark crescents on luminous skin that was not quite skin. It did not shine with sweat. It did not bruise with oxygen. It did not pick up the gritty patina of dust. She wore a simple garment the color of dusk. Around her feet the floor warmed to a pearly glow. Her hands were clasped before her chest, fingers interlaced. She was not breathing. The ship breathed around her. Her stillness was the axis of the breathing. Daria stepped forward despite orders she could recite in her bones. Something called her not with language but with shape. She stopped with her gloved fingers a breath from the woman's cheek. A millimeter of polished black glass separated human fabric from whatever this was. "Doctor," Elias said quietly, "I know." Daria was young enough to sound ashamed and old enough to sound tired. "Don't," said the woman. The word did not echo, it filled them. It turned all sound to its own purpose and whispered in the private cupboard where names and faiths are stored. Daria's hand flinched. The glove scraped the barrier. No alarm sounded, no force threw them back. "Do not touch me," the woman said, and her closed eyes did not open. For the stars remember. Elias had never believed in prophecies. He believed in work. He believed in the numbers that got people home. But his heart gave a single traitor's knock. "Who are you?" he asked, a pause long enough to make the question feel small. Not who, what remains? What remains of what? Of those who kept the flame. They withdrew with the kind of discipline a crew acquires one funeral at a time. They sealed the chamber. They argued as all good crews do with respect sharpened by fear. The conclusion tasted like compromise. They would observe. They would not touch. They would remember the way the word don't had tasted. But human curiosity is a seed that grows in the dark. That night, a relative term on a ship that measures time by sleep and coffee, Daria woke with wet eyes and the memory of oceans she had never seen. Salt on sunburned shoulders, the feeling of a wind moving across the back of a neck, music at the edge of hearing like the song of a high wire. She left her bunk. No one stopped her. She told herself she was looking for data only the heart could gather. The woman in the column had not moved. The ship still breathed. The glass between them looked thin as a prayer. "She warned me not to touch her," Daria said into her mic, "because ritual matters. A confession on an empty channel is still a confession. But maybe that's the point. Maybe warning is the part where the test is given." Her fingers brushed the barrier. It was not cold. It had the temperature of skin warmed by a sun. The Ardent moaned. Out in the dead star's tender gravity, something flexed that was not physics. Elias fell out of a sleep like a man thrown from a horse and hit the deck with his palms. Sirens lay down across the ship and howled. Lights went white, then red, then a torn violet that ate up shadows and spat them back. He was running before the first report hit the comms, medbay, hull stress, radiation surge. What the hell is that on the scope? In the chamber, Daria stood with her gloved hand pressed to the barrier and her head thrown back, teeth bared in the kind of rictus pain that makes children run to find their parents. The woman's eyes had opened. They were black. Not brown, not coal, not iris in flood, but the particular black that drinks light and returns none, like the mouth of a cave history had decided to use. "You touched me," the woman said, not anger, not surprise. A patient arithmetic, as if she had seen this number written many times. Daria jerked her hand back. The glove smoked, seams contracting with heat, polymer sloughing like frost burnt by breath. "Stop," Elias said, useless and human. "Do not touch me," said the woman, gentle. Not because you are unworthy, because you are capable. Capable of what? Elias asked. She turned her head toward him. The motion was the sun moving, the seasons changing. For a moment he saw not her, but a procession that stretched backward beyond any calendar, hands reaching, hands withdrawing, planets seated, planets spared, a line of keepers wearing shapes their worlds could love. He saw himself reflected in eyes that had no reflection. Of catching, she said, what falls? Something fell. The scream that tore through the Ardent was not like pain. Pain is local. Pain can be named. This was a pressure that stuffed every hollow in the body with ice, then lit the ice on fire. Men and women folded across their stations like grass in wind. A junior tech named Raffi put his hand on his own eyes as if he could hold them in his head and wept, voice high and thin and childish in a way that broke Petrov's heart. Sensors went blind, not failure overload. An ocean of data rushed in with no meanings attached, a flood of unlabeled raw that drowned every page. Outside, something pulled the black taut between the stars like a drum and struck it. The dead sun opened like a mouth. They saw the eater. It was not a creature in the way life carries water and warmth. It was structure. It was intention given geometry. It had no skin, only edges. It moved, and movement itself seemed embarrassed to admit how crude it had always been. Space bent. Light poured into it and did not return. The star quivered like meat under a blade. The eater drank. Fire, Elias said, because the human response to a thing that intends to unmake you is to remind it of how loud you can be. The Ardent spat fire. Plasma bright as noon scratched at a shape that was less than a shadow. Kinetic rounds thundered, little seeds of tungsten that would have punched through steel gates and stone towers and the proud, thick hulls of dreadnoughts. The eater absorbed force as if force were a flavor it had enjoyed once as a child and could not be bothered by now. "Sir," Daria said. Elias turned. Her eyes were not brown anymore. They were streaked with silver like frost frigging out in veins. Her veins actually glowed. It made him think of roots lit from within. "It's killing the star," she said, simple as weather. "It has done this countless times. It will do it again until it is satisfied or there are none to satisfy it." Daria glanced at the woman, then back, was the wall between them and the fire. A wall is a hard word. She was the night watch. She slept as a way of waking. "I don't have good language for this." "We don't need language," Elias said. "We need distance, Chief." Petrov's hands were already moving in muscle prayer, but the Ardent might as well have been swimming through honey. Space was heavy. The eater's hunger thickened it. The engines throbbed, gutters coughing sparks. The ship made a noise like a horse refusing to jump and hating itself. Daria stepped forward, barefoot now. When had she taken off her boots, leaving damp prints that sizzled faintly? She pressed her palms to the glass that was not glass. Her breath fogged nothing. The woman did not move. "I think," Daria said, "if I touch her again it will hurt everything." She smiled crookedly, the way a soldier smiles when she recognizes a road that leads to a field where friends are buried. "I think I have to." Elias put his hand out, useless, loving. "You will die." Her chin dipped. "One day, yes, but not before I teach a thing that eats that something can burn. I forbid it." He hated how soft his voice sounded. A captain's voice should be stone. His was cloth. She looked at him with a tenderness that made him think of the river with reeds and the little blue handprint. "Sir," she said, and in that "sir" was all the affection people hide in professionalism when there is too much at stake. "We are not built to obey superstition forever." She touched the woman. The scream that came then was not a scream. It was a choir of grinding suns. It was wind over mountains scaled with knives. It was plates in the planet's belly shuddering into new arrangement. The lights blew. The ship leapt forward as if kicked by God. Light poured out of Daria, not a metaphor. Light in sheets and wires, light that crackled and webbed like frost on glass, light that gathered in her spine and lifted her hair and made her mouth a soundless O. Her silhouette burned in afterimage on Elias's retinas. He saw bones inside her through the wash, delicate scaffolds like scaffolds in birds, designed for flight and singing. The woman in the column smiled, and it was like dawn across a winter city when the first windows go gold. "Keeper," the woman said, and the word did not come from her throat. It came from everywhere the light touched. "Do not be afraid to be large." Daria laughed. The laugh sounded like bells hung in cold air. She stepped through the glass. It accepted her. Skin became idea, and idea became filament, and filament became line of force. Elias reached out to catch a sleeve that was already a ray. She ascended a little, not up, but away from gravity's insistence. The eater had turned now, interested. It had the absolute attention of a tool. Its angles iterated. A man with a math mind could have called the steps. They formed a spiral that ate its own center. Daria lifted her hand. The star brightened, not because the eater wanted it, but because a better desire contested the field. The flame came through her the way music comes through the throat. It gathered, it acquired edges. It remembered something of itself from continents before people had words for continents. "Burn," she whispered, not commanding the eater but instructing the star in an old friendship. The star flared. White fire leaped and splashed the eater like thrown oil. The eater flickered. It is a strange thing to watch hunger flinch. It adjusted itself and opened wider. It was not malice, it was need. Daria brightened. She spread her arms and the coroner rose like a choir. Petrov fell to his knees in the doorway and covered his face. The comms officer sobbed into his console and said, "Mama, mama, mama," in a dialect he had never taught his friends. Elias watched, because that is what captains do when they cannot change what must be beheld. The eater tried to eat the light in Daria and discovered, in a way an equation discovers its own boundary, that it could not. The flame was not energy. It had preferred energy once, but it was older than energy's tricks. It was a decision the universe had made about itself a very long time ago. It would be. It would blaze. It would push back. Daria walked. Her steps did not land. They inscribed. She drew a circle in space around the star. It was not a circle anyone could measure with calipers. It was made of equal signs. The eater struck the circle like a wave strikes cliff, and the cliff rang like a struck bell. "Child," the woman said softly, and Daria turned her lit head. "Do not break yourself on what is only hungry. Teach it to starve." Daria nodded, and something changed in her face. It was not less love, it was more aim. The flame braided. It formed a thorn crown and pulsed. The eater shied. A section of it sheared away and evaporated in petals of unwet snow. The broken portion tried to become itself again and found the room for that already taken. Elias heard himself laugh. It sounded mad and 15 and ready to fight 3 boys at once. "Yes," he whispered, to a god he did not believe in, to a river he had not seen in years, to a child who had trusted him to come back. Yes, the eater's second strike was clever. It pulled on the Ardent. Gravity went hard. Metal wailed. A bridge spar snapped and flew like a harpoon through a station where 2 people had been standing a breath before because Petrov had shoved them aside with a curse. Daria saw it. She moved not fast but first. The flame reached around the Ardent and took it like a mother takes a child by the shoulders in a crowd. The ship lifted. It slid. It moved where gravity permitted the flame to escort. It came to a place where the angles in the light did not cancel. It rested in safety that tasted like apples. "Show off," Petrov muttered and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand as if nothing had occurred. The eater widened again. It grew facets like a cut thing. It tried a different hunger. Daria answered. She folded the flame into a spear and drove it not into the eater itself, but into the geometry that told the eater which way was. The eater trembled. For the first time, something like an emotion passed over it, not fear, but calculation revising cost. Then the others arrived. Up out of the dark they came, not ships, not animals, architectures of absence, a flock of needs. They moved as if following a wind. The first eater pivoted into their chorus, and the chorus oriented toward the star as a field of sunflowers turned their heads. More, Daria said, soft, rueful, the way a doctor says we're not done yet to a patient who has already endured. Okay. She lifted both hands, the star sang through her. A ring of white expanded, scything the nearest eater to scrap. The bits tried to be less than lampblack. The circle said no. Daria, Elias whispered, "That's enough, that's enough." But love is not a word that knows its own edges. She had been given a thing made of beginnings and asked to make an end. She had been handed guard duty in a place where time had broken, and she believed because she was human that a person could stand in a door and make death wait its turn. The flame burned her. The soft body that had carried it tore itself gently into light. Her ribs glowed. Her skin went translucent, and then a memory of warmth on a sweater. Her hair rose like corn silk in a storm. Her fingers trembled. She smiled because the pain was clean. "Our home," she said to Elias without looking. "Tell them we were here." He did not say "we will bring you home." He had learned. He said yes. She went up, no, out. A measure that does not correspond to up or down. She increased in scope and fell below the scale where breathing matters. The eaters struck the circle and broke themselves bloody on nothing that bled. One by one they considered the arithmetic and found it unprofitable. They left. They did not retreat. Retreat implies intention. They ceased to be here and were elsewhere, hungers choosing deserts where better prey might be too tired to learn. The star, freed, wept light. It threw a ribbon, playful, and a minute flare kissed the ardent shields. The ship shuddered like a dog after rain. Silence returned, not empty this time. A cradle of quiet. Daria was gone, not dead. Elias did not feel the subtraction that death makes in air. He felt a presence like a hand pressed against glass in another room. The woman in the column looked at him. Her eyes had gentled. They contained reflections now, a man with salt in his hair, a room, the possibility of crying. "She is keeper," the woman said. "The flame chose, you feared you stole it, she took it." "Where did she go?" The woman closed her eyes. "Where I would have, where hunger is loudest." "Can we follow?" "You can witness," that is following in the first language. "What are you?" he asked, blunt because the tenderness hurt too much. She tilted her head, listening to something far away. A door, a warning, a memory kept warm. And the eaters, a habit the universe formed in youth and did not discard, holes, accountants, teeth that balance ledgers with more passion than compassion. Every world has them, wearing local names. Never minds, always mouths. They are not evil, but not evil is not friend. He looked at his hands, they shook. He put them behind him and nobody saw. "How many of you were there, keepers?" "Enough once, then fewer, then I alone." Guardianship is arithmetic done with hearts. "You warned us not to touch you, because touching is joining. The flame has opinions, it prefers hands that bleed." He laughed once and put his teeth together to catch it. "That sounds human. It sounds like any animal that raises young," she said very softly, and in that gentleness he felt an age that made stone look like a quick idea. "The flame is the first animal. What happens to us now? You tell stories." She smiled with a tiredness that was almost relief. "Those are the rails, you will lay them, she will run on them as far as she can." She stepped from the column. It parted around her like water refusing to wet oil. She came to stand on the floor Daria had scorched. Bare feet, weight that made no dent. Elias had the deep, strange sensation of being less important, not because he had shrunk, but because the scale of measurement had increased. "My name is not for your mouth," she said, "but you may think of me when you wake in the night and reach for a light and remember that some fires are older than hands. Will we see you again? Not if the work goes well." She hesitated, and for an instant a child's hope flickered across her perfect face, ruining it beautifully. "But maybe if she asks." "What can we do?" Elias said, his voice roughened over the words. How do we fight this? We're just human, she said with a great love that didn't flatter. You endure, that is not small. She lifted her palm. A thin thread like a strand of milk came from the air and lay across Elias's wrist. It went through the skin without puncture. His pulse hit it and bounced. It warmed. When you sleep, she said, listen. You will hear the edges of the place she works. When you wake, do the thing that is in front of you. Change the filters, repair the pipe, teach the child, fire the engine, sing. Sector by sector, refusing is a way of burning. Then she was gone, not in a trick or a flare, but in the very ordinary way a person leaves a room and the room shrinks around the vacancy. They limped home. Home was a shifting word now. The Ardent threaded the needles of dark space, drifting by lighthouses that had gone out while no one was watching, sliding on currents that had not existed a year ago. They followed whispers. A mining rig on a blue-white dwarf, where men with helmet hair and salt tongues swore they had seen a flare that split an eater like an orange. A colony ring on a gas giant strung with shrines to a nameless saint depicted as a woman with hair like river weeds, whose halo was a star. A little research vessel filled with tired boys who handed over their accelerators for food and asked if anyone else had felt the heartbeat. Everywhere he heard her. Sometimes it came in the hum of the engine when the vents aligned. Sometimes in the space between radio crackle and a friend's reply. Once Elias woke in the dark of his cabin, wrapped in the weight of no gravity, with his heart going like a bird, and he heard Daria laugh a street away and say, "Teach it to starve." He lay there and cried once. The sound edged like cut paper, and then he slept like a man who has put down a heavy thing. The reports spread. A dead brown dwarf reignited, first in one hemisphere, then the other, like a face remembering its name. A black region of the Perseus arm unfurled to show 3 newborn lights as if something had dropped seeds. Ships once lost to drift sputtered into life long enough to whisper coordinates home. A deep radio array on a rock ball discovered that the silence had texture and the texture hummed with a single long chord. Choirs built entire masses around it. Children learned to hum it before they learned to write their own names. Not everything was miracle. Eaters still came. They found worlds where the math of hunger was still easy. There was loss and then loss again. There always had been. But now there were answers. Now there were hands that did not arrive late. Elias took the Ardent to a little sun that had been marked for death long before men discovered paper. It was the heart of a system no one would have called pretty. 6 scruffy rocks. A string of ice beads, a smear of dust like a scarf. But on the 4th planet there lived 1,000 people stubborn as hedge thorns, and a pair of twins who had taught themselves to play a flute out of plastic pipe, and an old woman who kept bees in clear-sided boxes so the children could watch them dance. The eater arrived slow, in the way a storm out of memory arrives. The sky went the wrong color. The air learned a new weight. The ground had an idea of falling. The colony's walls creaked. The old woman told her bees a story in which bees always win. Elias stood on a ridge, helmet off, hair torn by a wind that hadn't been in the forecast. The Ardent hovered inland, a bruise of steel against peach sky, dropping spanners and light and advice. He held the thread at his wrist. It warmed. Daria, he said. He did not know where she was. He did not ask her to come. He had learned to pray not for rescue but for work. The eater leaned. A long slice of cropping light posed itself across the star. The horizon darkened. Far off, a whistle like trains he had never seen in person drew nearer. "Hold," Elias said to the sky, insane. "Sweet, hold." The air trembled. The tremble became a pulse. The pulse became rhythm. The rhythm became a drum rolling toward the chorus. Behind the ridge, the twins on their plastic flutes clattered into the heartbeat by accident and discovered that accident can be skill if you repeat it. Men stood straighter. Women squared hips to wait. Children looking out the transparent bee walls widened their eyes and smiled the way children smile when something impossible knocks on the door at dinner. The flame came, not a blaze, a presence. The space around the eater grew particular, as if someone had sketched the edges in charcoal. The eater found its appetite shrinking. It opened wider and found width a less reliable friend than before. Daria stepped onto the ridge. She was herself for an instant, tall, tired, lips chapped by work, eyes with their silver frost. Elias choked. He did not speak. He had learned the poverty of speech. She lifted her hand and touched the old woman's fingers where they rested on the bee box. "You are old," she said, with love that honored effort like a medal. "Teach me something." The old woman blinked because a lit girl had just asked her to teach salvation to a saint. "Take off your shoes when you enter someone's home," the old woman said, stern in the way of age that has earned the right, "and talk to the bees." Daria smiled. She stepped out of her boots. She spoke to the bees. She turned to the eater and raised her hands, and her hair rose like river grasses in a gale. She burned. The sky became a page written in strokes of light so fine you could have stitched with them. The eater hit the page and the letters rearranged. It became a mouth-biting tinfoil. It recoiled. "Teach it to starve," she whispered, and the words were kind. The eater changed tactics. They always do. It went for the twins on the hill, for the old woman's bees, for the spanner spilling a cascade of sparks above the colony's east wall. Daria stood between and did not move. She was not a wall. She was a path a thing could not cross because it had already crossed her once and discovered a geometry it did not like. It left. The sky relaxed in sections. The stars smiled as if a child doing a grown-up task had managed and wanted approval without asking. Men cheered. Someone fell to their knees and kissed dirt. Someone else lifted a baby high because babies should see. Daria leaned on Elias's shoulder as if his bone were a tree. He ground his teeth to hide their chatter. She smelled like lightning and apples again. "You okay?" he asked. She laughed softly. "No, but I am what is needed. You always were." She looked toward the bee boxes. A worker returned home heavy with sugar, legs striped with pollen like a child's sock. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them to learn the sound. The flame is not mine. I am its mouth for now, but mouths multiply. This is not just my war." "Where do you sleep?" Elias asked because he could not ask, "Will you come home?" And who knows, sometimes a small question opens another door. She turned her face toward the sun in a gesture so human it bruised. "Where the next hunger is," she said. "Be careful," he said, and then laughed at himself. She smiled to let him not feel the foolishness. "I am learning to ask for help," she said. "You just did." Her eyes flashed like steel in full sun. "Then help me tell them." They did. They flew. They limped. They printed pages and recorded messages and wrote on the insides of hands. They taught the heartbeat to men who had never kept time with anything but their own breath. They tuned old machines to hum in sympathy. They set up little lights where big lights had died. They taught children to talk to bees. They told stories in rooms that smelled of coffee and oil about a lit woman who had been a girl you could disappoint with lab sloppiness and please with figs. It spread. Not like plague, like agriculture. Like gloved hands transplanting seedlings from one tray to another. Each place learned the song. Each place found within itself a neighbor who had always known how to stand between something hungry and something soft. Elias grew old. He did not notice. He carried weight, and the carrying made his back a map. He lost Petrov in a wreck that saved a ring station where they had never seen clouds. Petrov died with a spanner in his hand and a joke unsaid. Elias told the joke for him for years, and it never failed to win a grateful, cracked laugh. He went to the river once, the real one, Earth's brown ribbon, and dipped his palms. The reeds leaned toward him like a dog. He did not stay. Work was elsewhere. Sometimes, in the slip between dreams and duty, he saw the woman from the column standing in a doorway, not coming in, not leaving. Her face was less arithmetic now. It was tired and hopeful and human. He understood then that guardians are not born. They are hired by need, paid in songs. The war in the Perseus frontier wrote itself toward a different grammar. The eaters came to reckon planets and found themselves reckoned. The flame lay in nets of intention. Whole fleets learned to hum like mouths in an old hymn. When the hungry leaned in, they found, instead of meat, equations that returned an error value called no. They grew thin, negative space starved. It became, in regions, decorative rather than decisive. Daria changed too. Once a year, maybe, she would step down into a room and be herself. She would hug someone too hard and pull back laughing because she had forgotten force. She would drink water like a marvel. She would take off her boots and talk to bees. On those days, she would let the flame rest in its own cradle and listen to men and women tell her about small victories. A classroom where the lights had stayed on through the storm. A ship that had turned up finally after 5 years. A little boy who had learned the heartbeat and tapped it on his father's bald head with 2 fingers until the man cried. One such day, in a station built out of scraps and hope, she sat with Elias at a window that looked onto nothing but stars and the suggestion that there had once been more. They did not speak for a long time. Old friends know how to let silence count. "You're thinner," he said finally. She smiled. "Every time I teach the flame to speak a new language, it costs a piece of me." "How many languages are there?" "As many as there are hearts," she said, almost a joke and almost not. He ran his thumb along the thread under his skin. It hummed, "How will this end?" She watched a far light pulse, a ship's bow winking its location to anything that wasn't a mouth. "All keeping ends the same," she said, "in rest or in failure, but not today." He took her hand. It was hotter than a hand should be. "Come home," he said, and knew even at the speaking that home had moved. "I am home," she said, "when I touch a heart like this and it beats. When an old woman orders me to respect her floor. When a child's flute gets the rhythm wrong and the wrongness becomes a fashion and travels the arm like a dance. I live where that happens. There are many such rooms. They will not all be saved, but they will be lived in." He closed his eyes. The ship creaked around them the way ships do when they are happy and too old for it. "If I die before you, will you? Remember?" "Yes. And if I burn out first, remember me when you take off your boots." He laughed. Then he cried. Then he laughed at crying. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for 5 minutes they were not guardians, captains, numbers. They were people who had eaten soup at a table with a checkered cloth. The last time he saw her was not dramatic. That was the mercy. No choir, no last siren. He was in a clinic teaching a girl to fix a sterilizer with a paperclip because shortages make improvisers of us all. He felt the thread at his wrist go warm, then warmer, then the exact temperature of water in a bowl set out under stars overnight. He looked up. She was in the doorway. Her hair was shorter. Her smile was the same. "I'm going," she said. "Where the map bends around the rim. They say the eaters breed there in swarms like locusts. Sounds like gossip, but even gossip deserves a listener." "You'll be careful," he said, and rolled his eyes at himself. "I'll be large." He walked her to the airlock a person uses when a person knows where they are going and what they are for. She took off her boots and left them on the mat. The girl from the clinic daily took those boots and kept them under her bed for years and told all her lovers they were blessed. Daria kissed Elias's cheek, old habit, new heat. "Tell them," she said. "I will." She stepped into the air and the air held her up because good things learn. She burned into the dark without setting the clinic on fire. She curved. She was gone. He kept the promise. He told them in rooms that smelled like oil and coffee. He taught them the beat. He watched them teach it to each other until his stories were no longer necessary because they had stories of their own. He died, not in battle, not in splendor, but in a bed with the sound of someone laughing in the next room. He died listening to the heartbeat. He died with the thread humming. He died of being full. After, when the memorials ran out of chairs and the people who could not fit listened outside through open windows, someone stood and tapped the rhythm on the sill and said, "He was our captain. He told us that a thing that eats can be taught to starve." An old woman with bees nodded once, satisfied. A pair of twins played a flute badly and started a fashion. Far away at the rim, where the map folds like an origami crane and streets run out of names, the eaters gathered. They arranged themselves in old hunger. They opened mouths that were also mouths. They leaned into a light that did not flee. They felt the room of their meal shrink. A woman stood and did not break. She taught the field around her to say no. She used words like boots and bees and flutes and paper clips and soup. The universe listened because the universe remembers its first decision. If you had watched from a safe distance, there is no such place, you would have seen a bloom like dawn on the hull of night. If you had put your ear to the glass of your porthole and shushed your fear, you would have heard the heartbeat that sounds like rain on a tin roof and children trying to keep up. If you had closed your eyes, you might have cried without knowing why. The eaters did not end. No hunger ends. They learned edges. They learned manners. They took their appetites to places too far from stories, and found those places shrinking as caravans of little ships with engines patched by love and paperclips arrived singing. The galaxy did not conquer anything. It was slightly less eaten. In a room somewhere people never list on their charts, a child asked a question. Why do we take our shoes off when we tell the story? A grandfather with oil on his knuckles and a tattoo of a ship on his forearm smiled and said, because this is a home, and we are guests of the ones who kept it warm. One day not marked by calendars, a door opened in a station full of cats and plants and a coffee machine that only worked if you spoke gently. The woman from the column stepped in. She looked tired. She looked pleased. She took off her shoes. She kissed a picture of a man with salt in his hair taped above the coffee machine. She sat, and a bee landed on the rim of her cup, and she said, "Tell me what I missed." They did. In every telling, a ship called Ardent threaded the edge and held. In every telling, a captain taught himself to pray for work. In every telling, a scientist disobeyed a warning and learned the difference between ruining and rescuing. In every telling, the old words came truer for having been said, because faithfully spoken words arranged the air around brave acts like furniture. The stars did not go silent again. They hummed. Some died, that is the covenant, but their deaths fed fields where children learned to plant better. Some were born in places that had been scoured so clean nothing ought to have grown. Lights winked. Songs traveled. The sound that used to be fear became music. There are days when night falls heavy across the frontier and the old stories feel small. There are days when a family huddles in a shelter they built with hands and hope and listens to the sky groan around an appetite. On those days, someone always puts 2 fingers on a tabletop and taps the beat. Someone always takes off their shoes. Someone always opens a box and watches a bee waggle. Someone always tells this story. It begins, "She warned me not to touch her." It closes the way all true stories close, not with victory, not with flags, but with a dirty, durable, stubborn truth spoken with the last good breath, that when hunger comes, we will stand. We will teach it to starve. We will burn. We will keep warm the rooms where children sleep. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.